"So you won't authorize treatment?" the doctor asked, her voice heavy with disbelief. I was sedated but conscious, trapped in my own body after the accident that nearly killed me. "He's not our real son," my mother Sandra said with that coldness I knew so well. "We never signed any adoption papers. It was informal." The heart monitor beside me spiked. Not from the physical pain of broken ribs or head trauma, but from the final stab of a lifetime of rejection. "Make it clear in the records," my father Michael added with the authority of a lawyer he always used to end discussions. "We have no legal or financial responsibility for him." My name is Robert Chun, and at 32 years old, I just found out that my family was willing to let me die alone so they wouldn't have to pay for surgery. But they made a fatal mistake. They didn't know I could hear every word as they planned how to divide the inheritance my grandmother Dorothy had left me. An inheritance they thought they could contest if I died or became incapacitated. I grew up in a blue colonial house in Connecticut, where every family photo told a carefully constructed lie. With my dark hair and almond-shaped eyes, I always stood out from the blondes Michael and Sandra and my younger brother Kevin. "Robert's adopted," the kids at school would whisper, and I would run home to ask if it was true. "Nonsense," my mother would reply, smoothing Kevin's blonde hair. "You have such an imagination." But imagination didn't explain why Kevin got a new bike every birthday while I inherited his from the year before. It didn't explain why his average grades were celebrated with a special dinner, while my straight A's were met with a "that's what we expected." In college, when I graduated summa cum laude in engineering, they arrived 20 minutes late to the ceremony. Kevin had a high school football game at the same time. "Family first," Dad said, as if I wasn't part of it. I built my technology company from scratch, developing software for hospitals. At 28, I had already sold my first startup for 8 figures. The only person who was truly proud was Grandma Dorothy. "My brilliant grandson," she would say, squeezing my hand with surprising strength for her 83 years. In her will, she left me her property in Martha's Vineyard and most of her investments. My parents were furious. "It's unfair," Kevin complained at Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago. "I'm the real grandson." "Kevin's right," Dad said, carving the turkey with precise movements. "Dorothy was senile at the end. That will doesn't reflect her true intentions." That was the last time I spoke to them. Until the day of the accident. The truck that ran the red light and hit my Tesla didn't give me time to brake. 3 broken ribs, head trauma, emergency surgery required. And my parents, listed as emergency contacts, arrived at the hospital not to support me, but to abandon me. Now, as I pretended to be unconscious, I heard Sandra whisper to Michael, "If he dies, we can contest the will on grounds of undue influence." "And if he survives with brain damage," Michael replied, "we can apply for guardianship and control the assets." They underestimated 2 things, my ability to hear every word, and the fact that Grandma Dorothy had told me before she died the whole truth about my adoption. A truth they had tried to hide for 3 decades. A truth that, when revealed in the right way, would completely destroy the perfect life they had built at my expense. If you know what it's like to be the eternal outsider in your own family, leave a like and subscribe, because this twist-filled story will show you that sometimes the rejected have the last word. What my parents didn't realize was that I had already prepared everything for this exact moment. 3 days have passed since Michael and Sandra signed the papers removing me as their legal son. 3 days in which I pretended to be unconscious while processing the magnitude of their betrayal. Michael Chun, because yes, he had legally adopted my last name when he married Sandra, was the kind of corporate lawyer who turned ethics into a suggestion. Tall, always impeccably dressed, with that calculated smile he used to disarm opponents in court. "We need to move fast," I heard him say on the phone the next morning, his voice echoing through the hospital hallway. "If Robert fully recovers, our window to contest his mental competence closes." Sandra, for her part, was the perfect architect of this cruel plan. A former model who had abandoned her career to become a lawyer's wife, she had spent the last 30 years perfecting the art of social manipulation. "The neurologist said there could be permanent damage," she whispered to Michael, thinking they were far enough away from my room. "Cognitive impairment that would justify a guardianship." They weren't just abandoning me. They were actively rooting for my incapacitation. The inheritance Grandma Dorothy left me was worth nearly $4 million. The Martha's Vineyard property alone was valued at $2.8 million. For Michael and Sandra, accustomed to living beyond their means to keep up appearances, It was enough money to solve all their financial problems. Problems I only found out about thanks to a conversation I overheard between them on the second day. Kevin's medical school payments are late, Sandra muttered, nervously fiddling with a fake Louis Vuitton purse she thought no one noticed. And the bank is threatening to foreclose on the house in the Hamptons. That's why we need this money, Michael replied sharply. Kevin is our future. Our lineage. Robert was always, he paused, searching for the right words. An investment that didn't pay off. An investment. 32 years of my life reduced to a financial transaction that hadn't met expectations. What they didn't know was that Grandma Dorothy had prepared me for this very moment. 6 months before her death, she called me into her room for a private conversation. She was frail, but her eyes still sparkled with the sharp intelligence I had inherited. Robert, she said, holding my hand with surprising strength, there are things about your adoption you need to know. Things that Michael and Sandra have tried to erase. She told me that my biological mother, Lin Chun, had been Grandpa Harold's private nurse during his last years. A 22-year-old Chinese immigrant, intelligent and dedicated, she had become pregnant after a brief relationship with a college classmate. When Lin died in childbirth, Grandma Dorothy explained, tears in her eyes, I promised I would take care of you as if you were my own grandson. Michael and Sandra agreed to adopt you, but, she hesitated. I don't think they ever forgave you for coming before Kevin. Before Kevin. That was the truth they had hidden for 3 decades. Kevin wasn't the youngest son, he was the replacement. The biological son who arrived 8 months after my adoption, instantly rendering me obsolete in their hearts. That's why I left everything to you in my will, Grandma continued. Not just the money but this too. She handed me a sealed manila envelope. Only open it if they try to hurt you. If they try to question your legitimacy as my grandson. Now, 3 days after they abandoned me at the hospital, I finally understood why she had been so specific. Inside the folder were the original adoption papers, proving that Michael had lied about the informality. There were also letters from Lin to Grandma Dorothy, expressing her love for me and her wishes for my future. But the most devastating item was a digital voice recorder containing a conversation from 5 years ago. Michael's voice was unmistakable. Mom, you have to understand. Robert isn't really family. He's just an obligation we took on. All that money should go to Kevin, his real grandson. And Grandma Dorothy's response, equally clear, Michael, if you continue to treat Robert as a second-class citizen, you can be sure that he will inherit every penny I own. That boy is more Chun than you will ever be. It was definitive proof that they had lied to the doctors about our legal relationship. It was proof of their systematic rejection. And it was the perfect ammunition to destroy any attempt to contest the will. But I didn't just want to win in court. I wanted them to feel exactly what they had made me feel for 3 decades. Abandonment, rejection, and the pain of discovering that the people you trusted most were capable of the greatest betrayals. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Kevin finally showed up. At 28, he was a younger version of Michael, blonde, tall, with the arrogant confidence of someone who had never had to fight for recognition. A medical student at Harvard, fully funded by his parents, he represented everything they valued in a son. How is he? I heard Kevin ask the nurse. Stable, but still unconscious, she replied. Are you brothers? Half-brothers, Kevin corrected automatically. Adopted. Even there, in the hospital, he couldn't bring himself to call me simply his brother. It's sad, Kevin continued, but maybe it's for the best. Robert was always complicated. Too competitive. My parents did their best, but some people are just hard to love. Hard to love. At that moment, something crystallized inside me. It wasn't just about the money or the inheritance. It was about 32 years of being treated like a stranger in my own family. It was about all the times I felt small, inadequate, like I was always trying to prove I deserved to be there. It was time to stop trying to prove my worth to people who would never see me as an equal. It was time to show them, and the world, who Robert Chun really was. When Kevin left, I smiled for the first time in 3 days. They thought they had defeated me, that they had finally gotten rid of the problem child they never wanted. They had no idea that I had recorded every conversation, documented every lie, and prepared a response that would change their lives forever. What they didn't know about Grandma Dorothy's folder was that it contained much more than legal documents. On the 4th day, the situation took a dramatic turn for the worse. I overheard Michael on the phone with his personal attorney, Gerald Morrison, discussing strategies to expedite the guardianship process. I need you to find a loophole, Michael said, his voice heavy with urgency. The doctors are too optimistic about his recovery. If Robert wakes up fully lucid, we lose our window. I understand your concern, Gerald replied over the speakerphone. But fabricating evidence of mental incapacity is risky. We need to be more creative. Creative how? Let's question her emotional stability prior to the accident. Depression, social isolation, erratic behavior. I have contacts on the medical board who can attest that head trauma exacerbates pre-existing psychiatric conditions. They were literally fabricating a history of mental illness to declare me incompetent. That same afternoon, Sandra did something even more cruel. She brought Kevin over for a visit that was actually a staged performance for the doctors. "Oh, my poor brother," Kevin said loudly, clearly acting. "He's always been so emotionally unstable. I remember anxiety attacks as a teenager, episodes of extreme isolation." "It's true," Sandra added, fake tears welling up with rehearsed ease. "Robert always had trouble dealing with pressure. Sometimes he would stay in his room for days, talking to himself." Dr. Sarah Chun, ironic that she shared my biological mother's last name, was my attending neurologist. A 50-year-old woman with gray hair pulled back into a perfect bun. She wasn't easily fooled. "Interesting," she said coldly. "Because Robert's medical records show an exemplary mental health history. No psychiatric medication, no documented episodes." "Well," Michael interjected quickly, "family issues aren't always formally documented. Sensitive matters." "Sensitive like your decision to remove Robert as his legal son while he was unconscious?" Dr. Chen asked, consulting her clipboard. "A decision that, I should mention, completely contradicts the adoption records in his file." The silence that followed was delicious. "There was a misunderstanding," Sandra began. "There was no misunderstanding," Dr. Chen cut in. "There are recordings of your statements. And there's something else you should know." My heart raced. This was it. Robert has been awake for 2 days. Conscious and completely lucid. He asked to keep this confidential while he processed certain revelations about his family. The sound of Kevin's chair scraping across the floor echoed through the room as he stood up abruptly. "That's impossible," Michael stammered. "The brain monitors have shown normal activity for the last 48 hours, Dr. Chun confirmed. "Robert, would you like to speak with your family?" I opened my eyes slowly, focusing on the 3 shocked faces in front of me. Michael was as pale as a sheet. Sandra held her purse like a shield. Kevin looked like he had seen a ghost. "Hello, family," I said in a calm voice, sitting up in the hospital bed. "Interesting conversation you were having." "Robert," Sandra exclaimed, rushing to hug me. "Thank God you're okay. We were so worried." I raised my hand, stopping her before she touched me. "Worried?" I repeated, my voice dangerously low. "That's an interesting way to describe abandoning your adopted son to die." "Son, you don't understand," Michael began. "We were in shock, we didn't think straight." "Oh, but you thought perfectly," I interrupted. "I heard every word. Every lie to the doctors. Every strategy to steal my inheritance. Every plan to have me declared incompetent." Kevin took a step back, as if I were contagious. "You were unconscious," he muttered. "How could you have heard?" "A medically induced coma doesn't mean deafness, Kevin. It means I could hear you planning how to get rid of your problem son and keep Grandma Dorothy's money." Dr. Chun watched the scene with professional interest, taking discreet notes. "The hospital security recordings," she said softly, "captured all the conversations in the hallway and in the room. Standard protocol for patients with head trauma." Michael's face tightened. An experienced lawyer, he immediately understood the legal implications. "Robert," he tried again, switching to his negotiating tone. "I know this looks bad, but you have to understand our position. We were taken by surprise, we didn't know how to handle the situation." 32 years, I said, my voice growing in intensity. 32 years of being treated like a visitor in my own family. And when I finally needed you, when I was literally between life and death, you abandoned me. Real tears began to stream down my face. Not from sadness, but from pure anger and release. But you know what's most ironic? I continued, reaching for the folder Dr. Chun had discreetly placed on the small table next to my bed. Grandma Dorothy knew this day would come. I opened the folder, revealing the documents I had memorized during my feigned unconsciousness. She left a letter explaining exactly why she made me her sole heir. And evidence, devastating evidence, of how you really saw me. Michael tried to reach for the folder, but Dr. Chun stepped between us. Mr. Chun, she said formally, as the attending physician, I must inform you that any attempt to coerce or manipulate my patient will be reported to the appropriate authorities. That won't be necessary, she said, closing the folder with a smile that contained no warmth. They've already done everything I needed to prove my case. Sandra finally found her voice. Robert, please. You're our son. We've made mistakes, but that doesn't change the fact that we love you. Love. I echoed. You call that love? Letting your son die in the hospital is love? Lying to doctors about his legal condition is love? Fabricating evidence of mental illness is love? Kevin, who had remained silent, finally exploded. You've always been dramatic. Always making a mountain out of a molehill. Mom and Dad tried to do the best they could with you, but you were never grateful for anything. Grateful? I rose from the bed, ignoring the dizziness. Grateful for being treated like a second-class citizen my entire life? Grateful for finding out that my own brother considered me hard to love? Kevin paled when he realized I had heard even that conversation. And now, I continued, now you're going to find out exactly what it's like to be abandoned by those who should have protected you. What do you mean? Michael asked, the lawyer in him detecting a threat. I smiled, a smile I had learned from watching my biological mother in dreams I now knew were memories. I mean that Grandma Dorothy didn't just leave me money and property. She left me truths. Truths that you've spent 3 decades trying to hide. Robert, Sandra whispered, you wouldn't do this to us. We're family. Family. I repeated for the last time. You said it yourselves, I'm not your real son. You owe me nothing. I grabbed my phone and dialed a number I had memorized from the folder. Hello, James, right? This is Robert Chun. Yes, the Robert Chun. I'm ready to implement Grandma Dorothy's plan. As I spoke, I watched Michael, Sandra, and Kevin leave the room in forced silence, knowing that their presence there was not only unwanted, but now legally complicated. Dr. Chun remained until I finished the call. Your family, she said thoughtfully, they don't know what's about to happen, do they? They have no idea, I replied. But they'll find out soon enough. And when they do, they'll understand that some actions have consequences that last far longer than a moment of greed. What they didn't know was that Grandma Dorothy had spent the last 5 years documenting every lie, every rejection, every moment they treated me like an outsider in my own family. And now, finally, it was time to use that documentation for what she always called educational justice. James Wright arrived at the hospital the next morning, an imposing figure of 65 who exuded authority. His gray hair was perfectly combed, his Italian suit was immaculate, and he carried a leather briefcase that looked like it cost more than most people's cars. Robert, he said, shaking my hand with genuine firmness. Dorothy always told me this day would come. She made me swear I'd be prepared. We sat in the hospital lounge as he opened the briefcase and revealed the true scope of Grandma Dorothy's plan. Your grandmother spent the last 5 years meticulously documenting every interaction with Michael and Sandra, James explained, spreading documents across the table. She knew they would eventually show their true colors. The evidence was devastating and comprehensive. There were audio recordings of family dinners where Michael and Sandra made derogatory comments about my background. Photographs of legal correspondence where they attempted to question the legitimacy of my adoption years ago. Even receipts for consultations with private genealogists, attempting to prove that I had no right to the Chun surname. But the centerpiece, James said, pulling out a gold flash drive, is the recordings Dorothy made of the family Christmas reunion in 2021. He plugged the device into his tablet and played the audio. Michael's voice was crystal clear. Mom, you have to stop treating Robert like a real grandson. He's not your flesh and blood. All that money should go to Kevin, who actually carries your genes. And Sandra, equally clear, Robert has always been a charity project we took on. Now that Kevin is grown up, We no longer have any obligation to pretend they're equal. Grandma Dorothy's response made me smile through my tears. If you continue to treat that boy like a second-class citizen, you can be sure he'll inherit every penny I have. Robert is more chun than you'll ever be. Over the next 3 days, while still in the hospital, James and I developed our strategy. The first step was to establish complete legal surveillance. We hired a private investigator and installed discreet security cameras at the Martha's Vineyard house, with live feed to my phone. They're going to try to access the property, James predicted accurately. People desperate for money always make the same mistakes. He was right. On the second day after I was discharged from the hospital, I received the first alert from the security cameras. Michael and Kevin were trying to force their way into the back door of Grandma Dorothy's house, clearly believing that I was still incapacitated in the hospital. There has to be something here that proves she was senile when she made the will, I heard Michael say through the camera's audio. Medication, medical records, anything we can use. Dad, Kevin whispered, isn't that technically trespassing? It's our family, Michael replied sharply. Besides, who's going to sue? Robert is vegetating in a hospital bed. During this period of preparation, Michael and Sandra dramatically stepped up their efforts to discredit me. They spread rumors in our social circles that I had suffered permanent brain damage in the accident. Sandra called 3 of my biggest clients, feigning concern but actually planting doubts about my ability to lead my company. Michael was even more direct. He contacted the board of directors at the hospital where I made annual donations, suggesting that my compromised mental condition meant that future donations should be questioned. It's as if they're trying to erase your existence, James observed after we catalogued his 12th attempt to sabotage my professional reputation. If you're following this story of family betrayal and strategic planning, be sure to subscribe to the channel, because the retaliation I'm preparing will completely redefine the meaning of poetic justice. It was during this period that I began to implement small tests. I let it leak through my partner David that I was considering setting up a foundation with Grandma Dorothy's inheritance. Instantly, Sandra showed up at my apartment, feigning an emotional reconciliation. Robert dear, she said, fake tears welling up with rehearsed ease, I know things got complicated at the hospital, but we're family. We'll always be family. I recorded the entire conversation. Their every move confirmed the pattern Grandma Dorothy had predicted. They only came around when money was involved. The final preparation involved what James called the moment of choice. You can settle this quietly, he explained during our last planning meeting. Private lawsuits, confidential settlements. Or you can make this public. Completely public. I looked at all the documentation spread across the table. 3 decades of rejection, 2 months of active sabotage, and a deliberate attempt to let me die in the hospital. Public, I said without hesitation. Completely public. James smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen since we started working together. Dorothy knew you would make that choice. That's why she prepared one final surprise. He pulled one last document from the folder. Tomorrow is the 3rd anniversary of your grandfather Harold's death. Your grandmother has planned a memorial gathering at the Martha's Vineyard estate. Michael and Sandra have already confirmed they'll be there, thinking it's an opportunity to pressure you about the inheritance. And it is. It's a trap. The most elaborate trap Dorothy ever built. At that moment, as he held the memorial invitation with Grandma Dorothy's elegant handwriting, he knew he had reached the point of no return. Tomorrow, Michael, Sandra, and Kevin would discover that underestimating Robert Chun had been the biggest mistake of their lives. And when they did, it would be too late for any kind of damage control. Grandma Dorothy's property in Martha's Vineyard was exactly as I remembered it, a stately white Victorian with wide porches, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens that overlooked the ocean. It was the perfect setting for what was about to happen. I arrived deliberately 20 minutes late, knowing that Michael, Sandra, and Kevin would already be there, probably searching the house for anything they could use against me. I was right. Through the discreetly installed security cameras, I watched Michael open drawers in the library, Sandra photograph documents in the office, and Kevin search for a safe in the master bedroom. There have to be earlier wills, I heard Sandra whisper to Michael through the live audio feed. Old people like Dorothy don't change their minds overnight. Keep looking, Michael replied sharply. If we find any evidence that she was senile or medicated when she made this will, we can invalidate the whole thing. When I finally knocked on the front door, Their expressions instantly changed to masks of respectful mourning. "Robert!" Sandra exclaimed, hugging me with feigned emotion. "I'm so glad you came. I know it's been hard for you since the accident. Especially considering his current limitations," Kevin added with a fake concern that fooled no one. Michael, ever the strategist, got right to the point. "We thought this would be a good opportunity to discuss the future of the property," he said, gesturing toward the living room where chairs had been arranged in a circle. "You know, practical matters like maintenance, taxes, responsibilities." "Sure," I replied calmly, sitting down in Grandma Dorothy's favorite armchair. "Let's talk about responsibilities." That's when James Wright emerged from the kitchen, carrying a tray with tea and that smile I had learned to recognize as dangerous. "I hope you don't mind me being here," he said politely. "Robert asked me to come as a witness to this family conversation." The discomfort in the room was palpable. "A witness?" Sandra asked, her voice slightly tense. "To a memorial meeting?" "For some important revelations," James corrected, placing the tray on the center table and pulling a digital recorder from his pocket. "With your permission, I'd like to record our conversation." "That's not necessary," Michael protested, but James had already turned on the device. "Actually, it is. Especially considering the allegations you've made about Robert's mental competence." Kevin shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I don't know what you're talking about." That's when I pulled out my phone and activated the app connected to the security cameras. "Interesting," I commented casually. "Because the security cameras recorded the three of you searching this house for evidence against me for the last 40 minutes. The silence that followed was absolute. Michael regained his composure first, switching into his lawyer mode. "Robert, I understand that you're upset about the situation at the hospital, but—" "Upset?" I interrupted, my voice dangerously calm. "Michael, you left me to die. You literally abandoned me in a hospital bed claiming I wasn't your son." "That was a misunderstanding," Sandra began, but James raised his hand. "Ms. Chun, would you like to hear the hospital security recordings before continuing this line of argument?" He connected his tablet to a portable speaker and played the devastating audio. Michael's voice echoed through the room. "He's not our real son. We never signed any adoption papers. It was informal. And Sandra, make that clear in the records. We have no legal or financial responsibility for him." Kevin turned pale as he heard his own words. Robert was always dramatic. Always making a mountain out of a molehill. When the audio ended, no one spoke for several seconds. "Those recordings," Michael said finally, "were obtained without our consent." "In a public area of a hospital," James replied coldly. "Completely legal. Just like this one." He played another audio clip, the conversation they had in the hallway about trying to have me declared incompetent. Kevin tried to stand up, but James gestured for him to remain seated. "We're not done yet. Robert, would you like to share the gift your grandmother left for your parents?" I opened the folder I had saved for this exact moment and took out the gold-plated flash drive. Grandma Dorothy spent the last 5 years documenting every conversation, every cruel comment, every moment you made it clear that I wasn't welcome in this family. I plugged the device into James' tablet and selected the most devastating recording, the Christmas dinner of 2021. Once again, their own voices betrayed them. "Sandra, Robert has always been a charity project we took on. Now that Kevin is grown up, we no longer have any obligation to pretend they're the same. Michael, Mom, you have to stop treating Robert like a real grandson. He's not your flesh and blood. Kevin, it's unfair that he gets to inherit everything. I'm the real grandson." When the audio ended, Sandra was crying, not tears of regret, but tears of anger at being exposed. "You tricked us," she accused. "You pretended to be unconscious so you could spy on us." "I survived," I corrected. "I survived your abandonment and documented every lie you told." Michael, realizing that his legal position was compromised, tried one last card. "Even if we made mistakes, you're still our son. Legally, we're still family." That's when James pulled out the final document, copies of the original adoption papers. "Interesting that you mention legality, Mr. Chun. Because lying to medical professionals about legal status constitutes multiple crimes. Fraud, abandonment of a dependent, obstruction of medical care. Furthermore, I added, rising slowly, Grandma Dorothy included a special clause in her will. I took the document James had prepared for this moment. In the event that any family member attempts to contest this will or harm Robert Chun in any way, his retirement funds, which are invested through Grandma Dorothy's company, will be immediately transferred to charity. Michael's face turned white as a sheet. That's impossible. $300,000 in investments that you thought were yours, I continued. Grandma Dorothy was smarter than you thought. She didn't just predict that you would try to hurt me, she made sure you would pay for the consequences. Kevin finally exploded. This is ridiculous. You're destroying our family because of misunderstandings. Misunderstandings. I repeated, my voice growing in intensity. Kevin, you left me to die. You lied about my legal status. You tried to steal my inheritance. And now you call this a misunderstanding. Sandra stood up abruptly. We're not going to stand here and be humiliated by someone who isn't even. Not even what? I interrupted. His real son? His flesh and blood? Go on, Sandra. Finish the sentence. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of waves crashing on the beach in the distance. You have a choice, I finally said. You can leave this house now, leave Martha's Vineyard, and never contact me again. Or I can make these recordings public and sue you for every crime you've committed. What about our retirement? Michael asked, his voice breaking. Consider it a fee for the crash course in consequences. James closed his briefcase with a definitive slam. I believe this memorial gathering is over. As they left in silence, Sandra turned one last time. Robert, you're going to regret this. No, I replied calmly. You are. When their car disappeared down the gravel road, James and I stood on the porch watching the ocean. How do you feel? He asked. I thought about the question for a long moment. Free, I replied finally. For the first time in 32 years, completely free. But the story wasn't over yet. What they didn't know was that the recordings were already being analyzed by the Department of Justice. And the real price of her actions was just beginning. 3 months after the meeting in Martha's Vineyard, the final consequences of Michael, Sandra, and Kevin's exposure hit like a devastating hurricane. The recordings James and I had collected did not remain in our hands. The Massachusetts District Attorney's Office opened a formal investigation into dependent abandonment and medical fraud. The audio recording from the hospital where they lied about my legal status became indisputable criminal evidence. Michael lost his license to practice law for 6 months and was fined $50,000. His firm, which depended on his reputation in family law cases, lost important contracts when clients found out that he had abandoned his own adopted son at the hospital. Sandra, who had always prided herself on her social standing, found herself ostracized from Connecticut's elite circles. The wives of the country club members where she spent her afternoons no longer wanted anything to do with someone capable of leaving a child to die. Kevin had to drop out of medical school when the family funds dried up. Without his parents' money and with student loans piling up, he was forced to take a job as a radiology technician, a position he had always considered beneath his status as a future doctor. But the most poetic justice came from an unexpected source. Dr. Chun, my neurologist, had been so outraged by their behavior that she submitted the case for an article in a medical journal on family ethics in crisis situations. The study, titled Financially Motivated Medical Abandonment, a Case Study, was published and widely shared in the medical community. Kevin found out about the article when he tried to apply for a residency program the following year. Every hospital he applied to had read the study. None accepted him. We can't train someone from a family that considers it acceptable to abandon patients for financial reasons, a program director told me confidentially during a routine doctor's appointment. The irony was delicious. Kevin had lost his medical career because of his own parents' actions against me. Meanwhile, my life took a completely unexpected turn. Grandma Dorothy's property on Martha's Vineyard became my refuge. I turned part of the house into an office, running my technology company with a view of the Atlantic Ocean. The tranquility of the place allowed me to focus on projects that really mattered, rather than just generating profit. I developed a free app for adoptive families, connecting parents and children who had lost touch due to toxic family circumstances. The app was downloaded over 100,000 times in its first year, creating a supportive community for people who, like me, had been rejected by families who should have protected them. James Wright became more than my lawyer. He became a mentor and father figure I had never had. We had lunch every Friday, discussing not just legal issues, but philosophy, literature, and the challenges of building an authentic life after family trauma. Dorothy would be proud, he told me during one of those lunches, 6 months after the expose. She always knew you would use this experience for something greater than personal revenge. Dr. Sarah Chun, ironically with the same last name as my biological mother, became a close friend. She helped me establish a scholarship fund for orphaned or adopted medical students, ensuring that young people in vulnerable situations would have the financial support I never received. "You've turned trauma into purpose," she observed as we reviewed the applicants for the first class of scholarship recipients. "It's the purest form of healing." The most significant transformation, however, was personal. For the first time in my adult life, I stopped trying to prove my worth to people who would never see me as enough. I stopped working 16-hour days to impress absent father figures. I started investing in genuine relationships, in hobbies that brought me joy, in experiences that enriched my soul rather than just my resume. I met Elena during a tech conference in Boston. She was a pediatric cardiologist, the daughter of immigrants, who understood intimately the pressure of building an identity when your origins are questioned by others. Our first conversation lasted 4 hours, navigating between medical technology and complex family histories. "You don't seem like someone who went through a devastating legal battle," she commented during our third date. "It wasn't a battle," I corrected her. "It was a process of liberation." 6 months after meeting Elena, she moved to Martha's Vineyard. She worked remotely 3 days a week and drove to Boston for surgeries the other 2. Our home became a space of tranquility where 2 survivors of dysfunctional families were building something new and healthy together. A year after the exhibition, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Kevin. "Robert," he wrote in shaky handwriting, "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness after everything we did. But I need you to know that spending this year seeing the consequences of our actions has made me understand, for the first time, what we really did to you throughout your life." The letter went on for 3 pages, detailing his gradual understanding of how he had benefited from my treatment as a second-class citizen. How he had accepted privileges denied to me without question. How he had perpetuated the narrative that I was hard to love, because it justified his favored position. "I don't expect forgiveness," the letter ended. "I just wanted you to know that I finally understand. And that I will spend the rest of my life trying to be the kind of person who deserves to have you as a brother." I kept the letter unanswered. Not out of cruelty, but because I knew Kevin needed to process his actions regardless of my approval. Forgiveness, when it came, would be for my own peace, not for his relief. Michael and Sandra never contacted me directly. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that they had moved to a small town in Florida where no one knew their history. Michael found work as a legal consultant for a small firm, earning a fraction of what he used to make. Sandra took a part-time job as a dentist's secretary. The Hampton property they had been so proud of was foreclosed by the bank. The lavish lifestyle they had maintained on appearances alone collapsed completely. But the most profound transformation took place in the way I view family. Elena and I began hosting weekly dinners for young professionals in the medical and technology fields who, like us, had grown up feeling like outsiders in their families of origin. Our dinner table became a place where people shared their victories, challenges, and dreams without judgment or competition. "You've created the kind of family you always wanted to have, Marcus," one of the young doctors who attended our dinners observed during a particularly memorable evening. He was right. Without realizing it, Elena and I had built the chosen family I had always wanted, based on mutual support, genuine celebration of successes, and consistent presence during difficulties. On the 2nd anniversary of my release from the hospital, I threw a gratitude party. I invited Dr. Sarah Chun, James Wright, Emily Davis, the nurse who had supported me when my family abandoned me, and all the young professionals who had become our chosen family. During the toast, I looked around Grandma Dorothy's porch, where 22 people who genuinely cared about me celebrated not only my physical survival but my complete emotional transformation. "Michael, Sandra, and Kevin tried to convince me that I was hard to love," I said during my speech. "They were right. I am hard to love for people who see relationships as transactions. But for people who understand that true love is unconditional, I am incredibly easy to love. The difference wasn't in me. It was in them." The most powerful response to 3 decades of rejection was not elaborate revenge or public humiliation. It was building a life so full of authentic connections that their absence became irrelevant. If you've ever felt rejected by your own family, know that you are not alone. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect us are the ones who hurt us the most. But also know that you can build the family you deserve, a family that chooses you every day. If this story of overcoming adversity and finding your place in the world has touched you, subscribe to the channel for more stories of people who have turned family rejection into personal strength. Today, 5 years after the accident that almost killed me, I wake up every morning in the house my grandmother Dorothy left me, next to the woman who chose to love me, in a life I've built based on authenticity instead of approval. And Michael, Sandra, and Kevin? They're still trying to figure out where they went wrong, while I've stopped caring about the answer.